violence and human rights violations in Gaza and the West Bank through offering taxpayer-subsidized charitable tax receipts donations. So today, based on the results of this extensive fiscal and legal research, we are releasing a new report. It's titled Under the Guise of Charities, Canadian Funding for War Crimes in Occupied Palestine. And it's authored by Independent Jewish Voices Canada, Just Peace Advocate, and by co-writer Howe from University. And calling on the CRA to correct this illegal activity by removing the charity status of these organizations. To present all this to you, it is a great honor to have this esteemed panel, who it is my pleasure to introduce. So we have Anver, Emon, who's professor of law and history at the University of Toronto, and he is going to be discussing with us the charitable sector and the Canadian Revenue Agency. We have Khaled Mouammar, the Palestinian-Canadian founder of the Canadian Arab Federation, and he will be discussing the various submissions made to the CRA as they relate to violence, harms on the ground in Palestine. And we also have with us, Dr. Miles Howe, who is the person who co-authored the report. We'll be presenting highlights from the report. And most oftenly, we have with us Francesca Albanese, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967. Francesca will be discussing the international legal dimension of complicity with the Israeli occupation, in particular, as it relates to tax-deductible, subsidized financial contributions by charities. We're also joined by many members of the public, thanks to the 10 organizations that are live streaming this press conference today, including Independent Jewish Voices Canada, Just Peace Advocates, World Beyond War, Palestinian Solidarity Network, if not now, Toronto, Just Peace Advocates, Occupy U of T Palestine, Showing Up for Racial Justice Surge, Queers for Palestine, Jews Say No to Genocide, and Justice for All Canada. So before we get started, lastly, a few housekeeping items. We'll save all the questions from the media and broader public until the end. For media attending on the Zoom link, please use the Q&A feature to type in any questions you have for our panelists. And also please indicate the name of your media outlet. And for any members of the public attending any one of our 10 live streams, please type in any questions you have into the respective chats and ask the streamers to pass them on to you. And we'll be looking to Guru to handle the question period. So without further ado, I would like to invite Anver Emon, Professor of Law and History at UT.
Thank you very much. My name is Anver Emon. I'm a professor of law and history here at the University of Toronto. Though trained as a medieval legal historian, one of my areas of research is, for the last few years, has been the law of charities. Some of you might be familiar with my work, where I co-authored a report in 2021 on CRA audits of led charities entitled Under Layered Suspicion. Since I was later privileged to be appointed by the Minister of National Revenue to sit on the advisory committee on the charitable sector, on which I've been a member for the last 2.5 years. Needless to say, my remarks here are in my individual capacity and do not represent those of the ACCS or its members. Nonetheless, I will be making reference to the fourth report of the ACCS just recently published, and based on a variety of research memos that are also available. Today's press conference is focused on the findings of the newly issued report, and I'm grateful to the authors for sharing that report today. My role here is to help locate that report within a broader context of charities law and regulation. One of the curious realities of charity regulation is that since late 2001, Charities, particularly those doing humanitarian work abroad, have been entangled in the web of national security. Canada's law on charities is often framed in terms of the common law purposes of advancing religion, advancing education, relief of the poor, and a catch-all category of public benefit. But what is not always known is that the Canadian government also views charities as a security threat, given their presumed vulnerability to terrorist financing. To be honest, this national security lens on charities is hardly unique to Canada, nor is it unique to the 20th or 21st centuries. A casual stroll through medieval legal history shows that charities have long been viewed in the Western and Eastern traditions as both vehicles of hope and vehicles of danger and threat. Of course, not all charities are treated this way. In its 2023 National Inherent Risk Assessment, Canada's Ministry of Finance explains that the charities that pose the greatest threat are also the ones that are doing humanitarian relief and development projects in those parts of the world that are in especially dire straits. What has concerned me for some time now is that our charities regulation model so emphasizes the preservation of national security that our regulatory regimes seem to undervalue humanitarian relief, development relief, all of which arise out of Canada's obligations and commitments to international humanitarian law. As our commitment to humanitarian law declines, we should not be surprised to learn that Canada's humanitarian charities have a harder and harder time doing their work. This is ironic and indeed alarming. Canada has long stood for the virtue of multilateral humanitarian relief and peacekeeping, but in recent years, we have seen considerable scaling back of Canada's commitments to humanitarianism as a principle of regulation and oversight. Instead, a more narrow approach to national security and formalistic ideas of terrorism drive Canada's regulatory regime. Today's report offers a way to reverse that trend by insisting that Canada regulates its charity sector also by reference to the international and humanitarian legal norms to which Canada is obligated. The government of Canada remains bound by customary international law, which includes long-held commitments to humanitarian law. Charities in Canada that enable the breach of those humanitarian legal regimes run afoul not only of Canada's international legal commitments, but also a core charities doctrine called public benefit. Whatever may be Canada's security or diplomatic interests, we cannot ignore the fact that it is a government ruled by law, and that law includes humanitarian and international law. The authors of this report remind us of that legal obligation and its implications for how Canada regulates its domestic charitable sector. Thank you very much.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce anyone for the Palestinian-Canadian Anver or the Canadian. In part of making submissions of what we had with the CRA in regard to these five as well as
Thank you. I am grateful and honored to meet UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese on the unceded and traditional territory of the indigenous people of the Mississauga and Wendat Nation. Francesca's exceptional commitment to human rights and international law and her opposition to racism, ethnic cleansing, and genocide is applauded not only by the oppressed indigenous Palestinian Semites, but by Canadians of all racial, ethnic, and religious backgrounds. The refusal of Canadian officials to meet with a UN expert on human rights in the occupied Palestinian territory marginalizes UN officials and institutions and sends a message that Palestinian identity and human rights can be ignored. This emboldens the Israel lobby and racists to intensify their promotion of anti-Palestinian racism by seeking to dismiss, disparage, silence, and demonize not only Palestinians, but pro-Palestine Canadians, and rationalize the violence inflicted upon them in societal, institutional, and political settings, as happened to a friend of mine, Dr. Yeping Gay, who was suspended by the University of Ottawa. Zionism is a racist European settler movement and for more than 100 years has been trying to erase Palestinian history, cultural, and the diverse communities that have lived peacefully together in Palestine for thousands of years. The Zionist State of Israel was established in 1948 with British imperial support on 78% of Palestine, by killing 15,000 Palestinians and forcibly expelling 800,000 to achieve a Jewish demographic majority, to enable it to impose an apartheid system, and has since been unfortunately supported by Canada. My family was living in the city of Haifa in 1947, which had an Arab population of 70,000. Zionist militia attacks began and forced us, along with 68,000 of those 70,000, to flee the city, and my family sought refuge in Lebanon. Since then, I have been denied, as a Christian Palestinian Arab, the right to return because of my religious and ethno-cultural identity, in violation of UN Resolution 194 and Article 13 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. While any Jew or any convert to Judaism can move there and become a citizen. What is happening today in Palestine is a repeat of the 1948 Nakba, which is a catastrophe. Once again, Israel is trying, through destruction, starvation, forced displacement, and massacres, to force many Palestinians to leave the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, to enable it to officially annex these territories while maintaining an apartheid system. As it did, and it had done that even since 1967, by annexing East Jerusalem in 1980 and the Golan Heights of Syria in 1981. The International Court of Justice ruled in July that this Israel occupation is illegal and should end, and that reparations must be paid to the Palestinians for the harm inflicted on them for over 70 years, over 57 years. The court's rulings also affirms that all states are under an obligation not to render financial, military, and political aid or assistance in maintaining Israel's unlawful occupation and colonization of Palestinian territory. States that do not comply with the court's ruling may be complicit in genocide. Along with members of Solidarity for Palestine in St. John's and Palestinian Jewish Unity, we have been, over the last 2 years, submitting many complaints to the Canada Revenue Agency, requesting investigations of several registered charities for funding the Israeli government, its illegal settlements, and its military violation of all in violation of the Income Tax Act, official Canadian policy, and international law. These included the following charities: United Israel Appeal, Jewish Heritage Foundation of Canada, Mizrahi Organization of Canada, Emon Foundation Canada, Ronan Harari Foundation, and others. I'm happy to report that we have been successful, at least in one of them, I and Rabbi David Mivasser, to have the Canada Revenue Agency revoke the charitable status of the Emon Foundation, which funds illegal settlements and an assassination, a cover-up assassination unit called the Duvidan. In addition, we heard also that the United Jewish Fund was finally defunded. However, Canada must go one step further. There are at least 200 charitable organizations which are sending money to Israel. So Canada must immediately revoke the charitable status of any charitable organization that sends any Canadian dollars to Israel directly or through other Canadian charities. Because every Canadian dollar sent to Israel supports the Zionist apartheid regime in that country. This support subverts the orders of the United Nations and the highest court of the world. Canada's failure to stop the flow of taxpayers-supported money to Israel is contrary to international law and likely places Canada as being complicit with war crimes and crimes against humanity. Canada must act now and end the suffering, the apartheid, and the genocide that is killing a Palestinian child every half hour, must defend international law, preserve the rules-based international order, and hold Zionist Israel accountable for its flagrant violations of all relevant aspects of Canadian politics and international. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Miles Howe, co-author of the report, and is an adjunct professor in the Department of Sociology, Critical Criminology at Palestine.
Thanks very much. Before I start, I just want to say that the methodology behind this report is just based on open source data. So on Schedule 2 forms, every charity doing international work with intermediaries must disclose by name and dollar amount of those intermediaries. CRA keeps that type of information on an open source database for the last 6 years. Beyond that, you request multi-year data sets through access to information requests. So this is all, primary source verifiable data that the charities themselves are self-disclosing, hopefully. I'm going to just give you a quick rundown of the 5 charities and their activities that are contained within this report. Now I'll turn it over to Ms. Albanese. Number 1, Mizrahi Organization of Canada, between 2007 and 2021, did not even name its Israeli intermediaries and simply moved over $40 million in Canadian subsidized donations to the country code Israel. So that money could have gone anywhere. In 2022 and 2023, it names hundreds of Israeli intermediaries. Turns out it's an illegal cash conduit for a website called jgive.com that hosts thousands of Israeli charities, many of which are bent upon Palestinian erasure and dispossession, many of which support materially and financially the Israeli military, and many of which are located in the illegally occupied territories. And so when you click on it's sort of like a clearinghouse for Israeli charities. When you click on one of these, jgive.com simply simplifies the donation process. Mizrahi Organization of Canada makes it very easy for you as a Canadian donor and simply issues you a tax receipt on their behalf. That's illegal under the Income Tax Act. It's acting as a conduit. It has no direction and control over where those donations go. It's simply a fundraising arm. And should have been revoked simply for that matter. When you look deeper into its Schedule 2 Israeli recipients, you find dozens of them located in the illegal settlements, illegal under the Canadian Criminal Code and illegal under law. You find dozens of them bent upon Palestinian dispossession and erasure, including Regavim, which surveils and attempts to conduct legal warfare against Palestinians building in the occupied territories. Elad David, which weaponizes archaeology in the town of Silwan and attempts to dispossess Palestinians living there. I could go on, but for the sake of time, I'll just move into the next charity. Heritage Foundation of Canada. You Google international cash conduits and real estate empires, a case study in philanthropic crime. Back in 2022, I discussed how Jewish Heritage Foundation of Canada was operating simply as what we call a burner charity. It was established in 1976, did little to no business between then and 2019 until its co-burners, Gates of Mercy and Beit Oloth, and some of the most high-profile charitable status revocations in Canadian history were simply revoked. It operates out of a house. It has no website, it has no social platform, and the vast majority of its donations come from upper tier private foundations in Canada linked to real estate empires within the GTA and the Montreal area. If its donations are actually received in Israel, and specifically ultra-Orthodox community of Lakewood, New Jersey, is entirely circumspect, and may simply be a money laundering activity in entirety. But for the sake of this conversation, yeah, it does list some illegal entities, i.e. Israeli recipients in its Schedule 2 forms that are located in the illegal settlements, as well as the Hebron Fund, which actively works to empower and financially assist legal settlements. Moving on, the Ronan Harari Foundation, unfortunately associated with Ronan Harari, the CEO of Spin Master, the toy tycoon behind Paw Patrol. Its single donor is the Jerusalem municipality. Needless to say that governments at all levels are not qualified recipients of charitable donations in Canada, but the Jerusalem municipality itself is particularly problematic, given that its municipal borders have swallowed up annexed East Jerusalem and portions of the occupied West Bank. Moving on, Canada Charity Partners, consider it the little brother of Mizrahi organization, operating as a smaller scale illegal cash conduit, this time for the one-stop charitable shop known as israelgives.org, which operates in the same capacity as jgive.com. Makes no, ifs, ands, or buts about what these charities do, simply offers a catch-all for the Israeli charitable system, for which Canada Charity Partners offers Canadian tax-deductible donations for your Canadian donations to them. And finally, we have the Heseg Foundation, run by investment tycoon Gerald Schwartz, Onyx Investments, and his partner Heather Reisman of Indigo Books and Music fame, offers up incentives in the way of scholarships towards lone soldier programs for Canadians who feel the need to go serve in the Israeli military, which the United Nations has clearly found to be committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in its targeting of medical facilities, its treatment of detainees, torture, and its specific targeting of women and children, which the United Nations earlier, I believe today, found account for over 70% of victims of the ongoing genocide and siege in Gaza. So while not illegal per se, in terms that it simply incentivizes by offering scholarships and post-service education to Canadians who feel drawn to serve in this genocidal army. At this point in time, it may, if we're talking about Canadian morality and how we see our charitable sector, what we want it to be represented as, this may be an egregious act. So, thanks very much. I'd be pleased to answer any questions after this. I'll turn it.
Now, I'd like to introduce Francesca Albanese, the United Nations Special Rapporteur, Situation of Human Rights. So,
good morning, everyone. All let me acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Yurun Wendat, Mississauga, and Seneca people. It's an honor for me to be in your land, wherever you are. And coming not from Palestine, but talk about the struggle of Palestinians, not erased from the middle that of their land, the connectedness of your struggle, the struggle of the Palestinians, and the invisibilized struggle of indigenous people who are striving for a true nation-to-nation recognition. Earlier, colonial people like me and like many of you guys stand with you, solidarity with you, and we will continue to work together for a world that is more equal, fair, and just. I'm so honored and proud to be with you today. You have no idea. Canada is amazing because when I read, for example, the report that Arab Canadian lawyers put together on the APR, anti-Palestinian racism, I said, this is so big and this is so big of what we need to focus on. The fact that every time one of us is accused by the awful weaponization of anti-Semitism. And let's be clear, anti-Semitism is revolting, especially for someone like me, European, knowing the whole history we have. So how can one use anti-Semitism belittling the experience, that the history of the Jewish people and what they had to endure because of racism? How can this be used to silence what is happening to another people? And there is something very distinctive about the Palestinians, not to be confused with the discrimination that other Arabs experience. It doesn't matter if they are Christian, Muslim. If they're Muslim, it's a little bit worse. But all Arabs are discriminated because they're Arabs. And still, the Palestinians experience something more because they stand against whatever Israel claims to be. It's not the land for everyone, the land for the Jews and Jews only. And this cannot be dissected from what this country and the rest of the West are doing. This report is another piece of the story. It shows the interconnectedness of a political ideology premised upon racism and discrimination against the Palestinians, because the Palestinians and every claim they have and every inch of Palestinianness they have in their body is a stain for the state of Israel, as it is to the states of the Jews and for the Jews only. It cannot be. Israel exists. Israel is sovereign on its territory, can protect itself, must protect its citizens, but it cannot exist as an apartheid state, and we should be clear about that. And Canada, in its standing, in solidarity, in kinship with Israel today, is not only violating its profound commitment to deal and unravel its colonial past. Look at the incoherence of saying that they stand in solidarity with the indigenous people and they will make right the wrong, which what I hear is they're not doing that. It's perfunctory and it's so sad. And we need to know that and work to make it better. Can it be reconciled with what they're standing for today in supporting a state that is genocide? The Palestinians. And it is doing that. And in order to see the enormity of the genocidal intent, we need to look at the totality of conduct and crimes that Israel is committing against the Palestinians, in the totality of the land that remains for them, against the totality of the Palestinians, the totality of the people targeted, the totality of the members of the group. And again, there is something more. Canada is violating its international obligations. This is not about ethical principles. This is not about rhetoric. This is about binding obligation. There is something, this report makes reference to international, but in fact, the strength and the power of international law is even more significant, because this year, the International Court of Justice has recognized the plausibility that genocide is being committed as of January, and it has set preliminary measures. It has issued preliminary measures in January, and then in March, and then in May. But also, it has made conclusion in another case. There are two cases pending for this genocide before the International Court of Justice. One is Nicaragua versus Germany, and in that case, the International Court of Justice has reminded member states of all the obligations they have, not just for the genocide, under the Genocide Convention, but international human rights law and international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions. Where does Canada stand vis-à-vis that? It should have suspended all ties with a state that might be committing genocide as of the 26th, the 27th of January. But let me tell you, and this is where this report is critical, Canada should have suspended its relations with Israel even before, because the settlements, just if we look at the settlement, let alone the forced displacement of the Palestinians and the construction of the settlements and the annexation plan I wrote about. But let's think of the settlements. The settlement constitute a war crime and a crime against humanity, a attempt to permanently frustrate and annihilate the right of the self-determination of the Palestinian people. Not only Canada was criticizing the settlement at international level, rhetorically, yes, was there. But what was he doing to stop the advancement of the settlement? concretely, nothing, not only that, not only that. Canadian citizens were allowed to profit from it, to make investments in Israeli unlawful businesses, to sell property from the center of this city, and Montreal and probably other places, sell in Anglophone neighborhoods in Palestinian occupied land. This is a crime under international law and supposedly under Canadian law. So, you see, this is not just about doing the wrong thing under international law. This is about supporting from within an illegal endeavor. And the way, so we see the connection between the illegality of Israel's system and the deep ties that this country or some groups in these countries have. So this is the time to interrogate what these economic interests have to do in Canada. Because this is also connected to the silencing of all of us, to the defamation against all of us, to the smear that every one of us is to endure. Some more, some less, doesn't matter. It goes with our visibility. And we became dangerous, we become pro-terrorist, we become anti-Semite simply for the disconnection between the crimes committed in the occupied Palestinian territory and the crimes and the criminal mentality here. So here we are, as citizens of Canada or other countries of the world, we need to continue this investigation. And again, Canada is providing an opportunity to reflect and to move to concrete actions, because these businesses have to be targeted here. These charities have to stop working from here. And I will personally take, as I've done with anti-Palestinian racism, I will take this important lesson forward, making sure it's spread among other countries, because this is what we have to do. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And now we're going to do
Questions?
the question
Yes.
portion, and I'll turn it over to her.
So we'll start, nothing there, okay. Any questions in the room for media? Okay.
Wait, what was the question?
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question about the Jewish National Fund, and the defunding, the revoking of their charitable status. Is that still working its way through the courts, or has that been completed?
They claim they're going to file a right of appeal, but as of the moment, they can't receive any charitable donations now. They can't issue taxes. Their charitable status.
Okay, you're good. Let's go one by one on the live streams. Are there any questions that have come in that people want answered? Zoe.
It wasn't a full question, but something about the Bronx. Guess whether they come up or whether.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the Bronfmans do come. I also want to make clear though that like, as problematic as I feel that, you know, the Bronfmans perhaps are, I don't want to like bring out the Bronfmans and like just sort of these private foundations, the network of these private foundations, numbers of hundreds, right? And so on a level of importance, no, the Bronfmans are largely unimportant in this type of activity. You know, I could tell you what type of real estate Abraham needed, medallion properties, right? Fieldgate Cares homes, all kinds of developers, specifically, you know, it begins to move on, but specifically when you look at the Jewish Heritage Foundation of Canada, and if you work with the potential, this is doing nothing but laundering money, you then begin to investigate who is moving money through it, right? And a lot of this is real estate development. A lot of these real estate developers have properties in the Greenbelt getting busted open. And so while we can't, you know, make these conclusions right now, charities are a great way to launder money. Charities are a great way to move the money in, money out. And so within the context of funding illegal settlements and participating in war crimes and crimes against humanity, that's another conversation. But to make a short story long, it's a lot of people you've never heard of.
Any other questions from the live streams?
We have a question about what people can do to inhibit so-called charity.
Let's take it.
I think it's problematic because a lot of these are like, when we consider what these things are, right? Charitable organizations. They operate as money movers, right? Between, in many cases, the ultra rich and their recipients in Israel. So they're a bit ethereal in what you can actually do, right? The donors themselves are self-selecting. They've chosen to be part of a Zionist mentality, and the recipients themselves, they're not going to bend to whatever you want. If you tell them like, hey, it's illegal to make a settlement in Shiloh, they'll probably at best respond to you verbally, if not violently. And so in targeting the charitable organizations themselves, what do you do? Sadly, we're stuck with an appeal to law, right? And a regulator that has known about this situation, in some cases, decades, and definitely for years, right? And so you're hoping that this system will reform itself and that you will hopefully strike a chord. This is not the first time I've talked about this, you know what I mean? I'm just hopeful that now there's a bigger audience with more iPhones pointed at me, so someone will listen, or the CRA will finally go like, "Whoa, this is too hot for us." I don't know, man. Like, I really don't know. We're stuck tactically in sort of like, could you please like work this out so we can get back to, big philanthropy status quo, which is super problematic. One thing I do want to say though, just as an aside, to get my 2 cents in here, when we talk about Canada and the hypocrisy, let's remember that not too long ago, it was very much charitable to toss in a few dollars in the collection plate for the associated residential school in whatever place of worship that you were associated with. The conquering of this country involved the gifting of death with smallpox infested blankets. And so we're very comfortable here with a charitable system that sometimes deals in genocide and eradication of indigenous people. So before we all, not to make light of this, but before we clutch our pearls and, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. This is part of our history and this is part of our country.
I would just like to add, in the case of the Emon Foundation, the submission was made to the Right Revenue Agency, investigated in January of last year. The decision was made in July this year, and a half later to revoke. But in the case of the Jewish National Fund, which is a larger organization, which sends hundreds of millions of dollars, complaints started in 1974 when they started a campaign to collect money for Canada Park. It was being established on 3 destroyed villages in the occupied West Bank. And the decision to revoke it only happened also in July. So it took 40 years. So it depends on the power of the charity itself. Emon Foundation was a smaller charity, but not much money. Thank
you. Jess?
Yeah, I have a question. Has any investigation been done to determine if there are Canadians who have specifically benefited from the Hesite Foundation? Is there anything being done to prosecute these scenarios? And another complementary question was if the Canadian justice has been receptive to investigating charities.
To my knowledge, there have been no filings against Canadian lone soldiers. I know that there are certain groups that have begun filing against specific Israeli soldiers based on the, horrible things that they've begun posting on online, showing their actions in Gaza and what they've done, and they've been located. But I think for the most part, these are Israeli citizens themselves. So I would say that while aware of Canadians that take opportunity to go serve in Israel as these lone soldiers, you're not required to name who the actual scholarship recipients are. And so I'm going to say no on that one. The second question, is the justice system receptive on investigating these? If we go back to the JNF example, their sole intermediary for the most part in Israel is Karen Kayemet Israel. Its charitable purpose, what it said it did, never changed. Its charitable purpose since its inception, I believe it predates the state of Israel. JNF Canada was created in 1967, as were many of these Canadian charities. And so if you look at the grand plan of the annexation that simply took a step forward in 67, Canadian charities were an integral part of this, at least within the Canadian context. And so to return to that, the stated purpose of what Karen Kayemet Israel does is redeem the land of Israel. So we're literally stuck in some kind of biblical Old Testament style justification, which the CRA up until 2024 has been like, no, that's okay. Yeah, redeeming the land of Israel and all that entails, all that is left unsaid there, has been acknowledged as like that's an okay charitable purpose since its inception. And so you're looking at my math escapes me, but about 57 years where that was cool and that was okay. And so is it receptive? It's receptive when it finds that money is being lost. Let's be clear, the Emon Foundation and JNF, great cause for celebration. But these, as far as I've been able to research, are the first two charitable revocations that have actually delved into the charitable purpose of the Israeli recipients. All other charitable status revocations have dealt with the CRA not getting its cut, and that money is being laundered or not properly divulged, and it's simply such a great amount that the CRA steps in. They have not shown, up until Emon and JNF, one inkling of concern over the loss of Palestinian life. Everyone else?
Part of your question was about the legal framework around what we might call around a lone soldier. So the Ministry of Finance puts out periodically, it's called the National Inherent Risk Assessment Report. And when it lists the highest risk with respect to terrorist entities, one of the categories is called the foreign fighter. Now, importantly, what's important for your question is that the foreign fighter is only someone who goes and fights with the listed entities listed by public safety. Because Israel and the IDF are not listed entities, technically, soldiers returning from Israel would not be considered foreign fighters, therefore would not pose a national security consideration to Canada. And that would be the legal framework that I'm aware of on this motion. Harley.
We have a question from the Ignon National live stream. Is there also a bigger story here about the absence of a charity watchdog in Canada, something like the Charity Commission in the UK, or do other countries have the same problem?
So there are discussions, and so here I'm speaking more as the historian of charities, and so please forgive my distractions. In Canada, charities are regulated by the Charities Director within the CRA. So that means they're regulated subject to the taxation. In England and Wales, what you're referring to is the Charities Commission, which was created legislatively to register charities and regulate them, but not regulate them with respect to tax revenue purposes. So we do not have an independent charities regulator, at least independent from the tax regime. In terms of charity watchdogs, there are a number of third-party organizations, some of which have political leanings, and so there isn't one. We do have a number of national organizations and provincial ones that attempt to try to engage the sector, but none of them have taken on this issue. Here, I would think of Imagine Canada the Ontario Not-for-Profit Network, and a few others are ones that I think could, if prompted, take up this mantle, but it would need to be done with their cooperation.
Thank you. We have a bunch of questions coming in, so we'll start 1, 2, 3, and 4.
So this is a question from the World Beyond for Canada live stream for Francesca Albanese. So it's kind of saying the Canadian government is talking the talk, but not taking meaningful action. On the one hand, they're saying that they're taking violence against civilians in Lebanon and Gaza seriously, and saying that they're cutting arms, but we know that they aren't actually doing those things. So the question is, are you seeing the same pattern in other countries of governments talking the talk but not taking meaningful action? And what do you think is working to push governments to action?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. This is a pattern that can be observed in other countries, and it's a complex one because again, when we talk about arms transfer, we have not only the direct and indirect transfers, and this has been used by many countries to hide the transfers, in fact, by continuing to directly support Israel with weapons or with parts of weapons that are considered, are presented as more innocuous, but in fact they're not. And the pattern is there. And it's true for Western countries, but also I want to shed light on something that is not directly interrogated by your question, but it's relevant. When I insist with others on cutting relations, military, trade, strategic, political, diplomatic, I refer to a dual way. There is what is transferred or sold to Israel, but it's also what is purchased from Israel. It often entails strategic intelligence, surveillance system, weapons, or military technologies that are turning, in fact, our own governments into more repressive, less democratic, and this is something we should be careful of. So we do see this trend also in the global south. Is it changing? Yes, it's changing. We have countries in Europe and countries in the global south started to cut some of these ties. It's a work in progress. So a lot is what is our is we need to be very specific. We need to give. We cannot afford to leave any stone unturned. We need to look at where the centers of interest are, economic interest, financial interest, because then everything is sold like, again, charity are the best example, because one thing is doing the right thing and supporting or innovative things, and then this is where the economic and financial interests that needs to be tackled are. So this work is exemplary, but also needs to be followed by other actions. And again, I will do what I can to share this example with civil society. Civil society and lawyers are pulled upon this enormous task of holding governments and other private actors and municipalities accountable. But this is the glory we have to contribute to bring justice. Palestine.
We did have one more question. Okay. He's also towards you. So universities are often, or anybody, I think, universities are often called the largest real estate owners, and they play a role in advancing knowledge, but also legitimizing these wealthy individuals or charities. For example, U of T has continued to solicit donations for their partnerships with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Emon. So any message or suggestions for universities and university administrators?
So I say this as a professor here who also is fundraising for my units. So I said with not with caution, but with carefulness. I think you're right that we do see a lot of you put it this way, we are well aware of the Palestine exception in the university system, whether it's Canada or the United States. University of Toronto itself was censured by the CAUT back in 2021 for what was alleged to be donor interference around a hiring, which still remains confidential within the institution. I'm not sure I can tell people whether to donate or not. What I can do, and what I have been wanting to do for many years, is allow us to identify Palestine studies as an area of priority. Allocate funding so that we can hear the word Palestine, so we can talk about it, and so we can organize around it. I've asked for fundraising priority. Palestine studies here at the University of Toronto, and I've waited for 4 years. And I think that it's not simply that we tell them who to or not to take funding, but rather as an institution committed to academic freedom, even if it makes us uncomfortable. The fact is, we're not allowed to fundraise for things that don't have academic priority. And at the University of Toronto, we don't have academic priority for the study of Palestine. The fact that we don't creates the economics of disparity and the economics that enable the erasure. And so my response would be, and I think any business would be open to this, is maximize your market share by creating more opportunities for fundraising. Why we haven't been able to secure this, I don't know. I'm not told why. But it's been 4 years. I think it's time. And I would hope that every university in Canada, at the very least, start doing the same.
Thank you. I have 4 points to make. And those of you who have this report shared with my lectures and interaction at universities, I have already got it. But I think that universities have in countries like Canada have a really huge responsibility, because in a way it's the way knowledge is formed and disseminated. These places cannot turn into corners of obscurantism where knowledge is selectively censored. And again, it happens on Palestine, but it might happen on other subjects that are deemed unpalatable or politically suitable to some. And but also there is another element that is really striking, and I look at colleagues from legal disciplines. How can you, honestly, how can you teach about human rights in classrooms and then do not support or even reprimand students taking a stand in defense of human rights over people who have been oppressed for decades and now they're being genocide? How can you, honestly? Again, this is pushing the concept of justice, that it's so selective, that it's a betrayal of everything the term justice means. It's justice for some and cannot be accepted. And then, of course, it boils down to the ties that universities have with the Israeli academia, with the Israeli technology sector. And I encourage everyone to look at, because this has been so revealing for me as well, to look at the work of Israeli scholars like Nurit Peled, whom I often quote, an important light she has shed on how Palestinians are demonized and dehumanized in the knowledge making and the knowledge dissemination space in Israel itself. Even more important is the work of Israeli scholar Maya Wind. Was written a book which is titled Towers of Iron and shed light on how Israeli universities and academia contribute to create that system of injustice, because they do contribute to the intellectual and technical underpinnings of the apartheid system that Israel uses on Palestinians. One more point, because if I don't want it to get lost. It goes to Jewish comrades and brothers and sisters. You have no idea of how visible you are nowadays. I live and work in an Arab country and travel across the Arab region for the first time. It didn't happen 10 years ago when Jewish Voices for Peace, so your organization as well, was already mobilized to bring Palestine forward. And now it's so visible, and it's also thanks to the students, to Jewish students who have come forward to defend Palestine and Palestinians, brothers and sisters and comrades and friends. You are bringing the Jewish identity back to the Arab region. You are rebuilding bridges that have been broken with the creation of the State of Israel as a project that has killed or tried to kill Palestinian nation. Thank you for that.
Yeah, Josh Lalonde from The Leveler is asking if there is any evidence of direct political pressure on CRA not to investigate these charities.
Not that I can find personally. Maybe Dr. will have some other things to add. JNF certainly did raise a stink, claiming that there was interference and that this was, very anti-Semitic, but such is the expected response. Of interest these days is CIJA, Canada-Israel Jewish Agency, and its association with United Israel Appeal. So CIJA works as a pretty hardcore lobbyist, also as a watchdog-ish kind of, and also highly Zionist in its orientation in the outreach products and blogosphere, etc. It lists a variety of political supporters on its website, and its association with the UIA as a recipient. The UIA, United Israel Appeal, is by far and away the largest recipient of Zionist cash in Canada, and its association as little more than the speaking arm or the mouth of the UIA, as it were, remains to be investigated. So whether the politicians who are self-declaring themselves to be on its stable or not, then pressure the CRA to do nothing. No, I would say that would be very groundbreaking if that were to be the case, where PMO's office icing investigation.
2 other reporter questions.
Just one more.
One more.
Yeah, so again from The Leveler, how does the lax enforcement of tax law regulation on charities funding Israeli occupation compared to the enforcement of the same laws and regulations on charities supporting Palestinians?
Sure. So I think so I would want to direct you to the advisory committee in the charitable sector issued its 4th report in September. It's publicly available on the advisory committee's website. Supporting that report were 2 working papers of research, one of which was on the National Parent Risk Assessment 2023 report from the Ministry of Finance. What's interesting about charities is that you must understand that they are, on the one hand, subject to tax regulation under the Income Tax Act, and that's where the charities regulator, that's their main domain. But since 9/11, they've also been subject to a number of other national security regimes that relate to anti-terrorism financing. Remember that in 2001, after 9/11, the Financial Action Task Force issued a special recommendation on terror financing, and it identified charities as vulnerable to terror financing. Now we know what charities they actually mean. So it becomes embedded in a multilateral regulatory regime. So charities then in Canada, particularly with those supporting Palestine, and in those particularly supporting Gaza post-2006, are going to fall into this National Security Tax Authority network or web. And so if I were a charity, for instance, doing water treatment work in Gaza, prior to 2006, I was fine for the most part. After 2006, when Hamas was elected and ultimately assumed control over Gaza post 2007, any charity doing work in Gaza is under surveillance and to be subject to considerable scrutiny, precisely because Hamas is listed as a terrorist entity, not recognized as a government by this. Moreover, it also is true that the government of Canada has chosen a particular U.S. chosen line of argument. The United States Treasury, and in particular, one of its officials, Matthew Levitt, wrote a book about Hamas that came out right before the Hamas elections. And in the argument there, it was said that donations to what might be Hamas's social wings are not distinguishable from any donations to the military. He made an argument called the fungibility thesis. If you donate to hospitals controlled by Hamas, you're effectively giving Hamas budget relief to then send money over to its military. And so since 2006, being able to support any activity in Gaza is highly suspect. The only way you can really do it is through what Canada calls qualified donees. UN agencies qualify for this status. So it becomes problematic when we start raising questions about UNRWA, which is the one main UN body working for.
1, 2, 3. Yeah, so let's just hear the questions. We've got to start wrapping it up. So while we try to bash the questions if we can.
This is from the Justice for All live stream, and it's a question for kind of strategic campaign purposes about whether there is in Canada one charity the government would be more likely to invest in.
Okay, and what about your questions?
We've had a couple of people from the Surge live stream who just wanted some elaboration on the relationship between Spin Master and Guise.
Okay, and then
the question is related to the importance of raising awareness. You mentioned it's difficult to get information about these reports out. How important is the role of the police in disseminating this information, and sort of also response to police repression that tries to tap that down as far as maybe local law and also international law? How can we use those to advance information?
I have one more here.
I have a question about these. A lot of outfits have popped up since October 7th inside Canada who are now asking for charitable status. One of them being Magen Harut, which is this vigilante organization which we've seen operate on the campus of the University of Toronto. Could you just speak a little bit about, because I don't know this, how do you get charitable status here? I mean, how does an organization like Magen Harut get charitable status?
So Miles, let's have you come up or and just do as succinct as you can. You guys wrap up.
So, who should you go after first? What would score a big victory? I have a bone to pick with Mizrahi Organization of Canada just because of the brazenness of who they're self-declaring their recipients are. It's so completely illegal, morally just disgusting. And so if you're going to act on that, do that one first. It's a no-brainer, slam dunk. You know what I mean? Like, it's totally illegal under the Income Tax Act, under the Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act, under the Geneva Conventions Act, under our customary international law obligations, et cetera, et cetera. So Mizrahi Organization of Canada, I think that's a vital one. How do you organize yourself to become a charity? You're right. It's very interesting that a private vigilante security service, making people feel scared, can become a registered charity in Canada. So maybe Dr. Emon can answer that. I'm as surprised as you are that passes the honorable public benefit test, to which we hope to have all charities adhere to. What its public benefit might be. Is it promoting a religion? Probably in its mind. It's certainly not acting in an education purpose. It's not acting to a relief of poverty, and it may or may not be acting towards some other community purpose. I'm a bit lost as to what your word.
My question is about the relationship between Spin Master and Guise.
Right. So Ronan Harari is the CEO and founder of Spin Master and Paw Patrol. He has two private foundations to his name, the 1R32 Foundation and the Ronan Harari Foundation. I believe 1R32's sole purpose is to siphon money into the Ronan Harari Foundation. I may be wrong on that. I deal with all these private foundations and it becomes a bit of a blur after a while, but I can tell you that the Ronan Harari Foundation's near sole purpose is to move money into the Jerusalem municipality. And that's its self-declared Israeli recipient. When we're talking about qualified donees, the CRA does make clear that levels of government are not qualified donees. And what is problematic about the Jerusalem municipality in and of itself, as I mentioned, it has grown its borders to swallow up illegally annexed East Jerusalem, as well as portions of the West Bank. So it's an occupying force. It's an illegal occupying force, no matter what, green projects or lovely walkways, whatever it builds atop raised Palestine.
Just one more question, also related to the importance of activists in playing a role in raising awareness about these issues with the charities that you mentioned and tackling police repression, whether through domestic channels and international channels. I mean, I'm saying this kind of in comparison to relying on the legal work that's happening in the background.
Yeah, man. I mean, if you have ideas for me, I would ask you the same question. Not to navel gaze on it, but like I'm writing a paper on why doesn't this work? Do you know what I mean? And like the issues related to when you're tactically limited to a degree in making a request for a legal intervention from a system in and of itself that may or may not be either have your interest at heart, be interested in this situation because, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is just my thoughts on the matter, but charitable organizations like this operate within that very ethereal framework. It simply moves money in, moves money out. So I don't know, I'm not a hacker, but aside from that, I can't really come up with other sort of, activist tactics to shut this down. It's illegal, right? But as we know, the law isn't distributed equally. So, and in terms of police repression, it's complicated, right? Because you literally, to me, the next step here beyond asking the CRA to simply do its job and reinstore faith in the Canadian charitable sector would be to call up the RCMP and, advise the war crimes unit that we have Houston, we have a problem here. Do I have a problem calling the cops on anybody? Absolutely. So will I, swallow my pride and find the number and call them up? Certainly my next step.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex, yeah. Thank
you.